Welcome to Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the place where truth, power, and resilience come alive. In today's powerful story, we unravel the tale of a woman sent to serve as a translator for one of Africa's most formidable leaders, Captain Ibrahim Traoré. But beneath her polished words hid a deadly secret. Her mission wasn't to assist, it was to assassinate. What happens next is a testament to human complexity, courage, and the strength of redemption. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and prepare to feel every emotion. Let's begin. Amira stepped off the tarmac in Ouagadougou, and though the heat wrapped around her like a second skin, it was what struck her most. She had been trained for discomfort, molded into a weapon fluent in dialects from Arabic to Fula, prepared to carry out a mission with unflinching precision. But none of her simulations, none of the barked commands from handlers in cold briefing rooms could prepare her for the impact Ibrahim Traoré would have on her, not through charm or manipulation, but through something far rarer: integrity. Her cover was airtight. She was an official translator from the International Peace Initiative, embedded with the Burkinabe government to assist in security summits. The truth was far darker. She had been sent by a clandestine foreign agency that thrived in geopolitical shadows, tasked with penetrating the heart of Traoré's circle. Her mission was clear: earn his trust, identify his vulnerabilities, and when the time came, ensure the door was open for someone else to take his life. They said Traoré was a threat. They painted him as erratic, dangerous, an unpredictable force that could destabilize the region. But the briefing documents never showed her the schoolchildren who waved handmade flags when his convoy rolled through. They didn't mention the farmers who paused their labor and saluted him with reverence. And they certainly omitted the night he carried a wounded soldier on his back across a flooding river. Traoré was not a figure of tyranny. He was a man who bore his people's aspirations like armor. Still, Amira kept to protocol. Her arrival was understated. She settled into the guest wing of the secure compound, began translating classified documents, assisting in negotiations, recording his daily activities. She remained silent unless directly addressed. Her posture rigid, her eyes always downcast. But the more she observed, the more the inconsistencies in her training became impossible to ignore. Traoré never requested luxuries. He turned away personal gifts. He shared meals with his security team, refusing to eat until every guard had been served. And he never went to sleep before confirming that the final soldier on watch was accounted for. One night, she handed him a translated report concerning foreign arms deals. He looked at her, weary but present, and asked, "What do you think they want from us, Amira?" It was a question that wasn't meant to be answered diplomatically. In his eyes, she saw the sorrow of a man who had buried too many comrades, who had folded too many flags. Carefully she replied, "They want to silence the ones who still have hope." He regarded her for a long moment before nodding solemnly. "Then we speak louder, even if our voices shake." That moment became the first crack in her resolve. Slowly, she began delaying her coded transmissions. She altered her intelligence briefs, toned them down. She told herself it was tactical hesitation, a stalling maneuver. But the truth clawed deeper. She no longer saw him as an enemy. He was a man bearing wounds that mirrored her own. Her brother had died in a senseless war orchestrated by global powers that never paid the cost. Now she was here, another pawn, sent to dismantle someone who simply refused to surrender to the game. Guilt gripped her. Sleep abandoned her. She began locking her bedroom door with trembling fingers, not to keep out intruders, but to wall herself off from the version of herself that might still complete the mission. And yet she didn't leave. A part of her held on, hoping redemption was still within reach. That maybe, just maybe, the story she had been forced into could have a different ending. But change rarely arrives gently. It comes in bursts, in cracked foundations and shuddering truths. And in her heart, Amira knew the storm was building. What she didn't yet understand was whether it would shatter Ibrahim Traoré or consume her first. Amira's second week in the compound began like any other. Coffee in a chipped cup, the early murmur of boots on gravel, and the rhythmic hum of generators beneath the walls. But inside her, the tension only deepened. She had seen too much, too quickly. Each meeting she translated peeled away another layer of propaganda that had once justified her mission. Ibrahim Traoré was not the brutal warlord her handlers had described. He was precise, thoughtful, often pausing to hear out junior officers before speaking himself. His questions in cabinet meetings weren't about consolidating power. They were about clean water, power grids, literacy rates. And every time he looked her way, it was not with suspicion but with a quiet expectation, as if he saw something redeemable in her she had long stopped seeing in herself. The nights were the worst. That's when the memories returned. Her brother Adil's body arriving in pieces in a steel coffin, her mother's silent scream, the way governments offered condolences while signing new arms contracts behind closed doors. Amira had joined the agency not out of patriotism, but because they promised her purpose. They told her she'd be the scalpel in a world of blunt force. But now, standing beside a man who bled for his people instead of bleeding them dry, that promise felt like another lie. She began to stall. When messages from her handlers arrived, encrypted and urgent, she marked them unread. When she did respond, her reports were vague, deliberately padded with diplomatic filler. Her assigned courier, known only by the code name Wraith, warned her, "Delay again and we remind you what's at stake." A photo arrived the next day, her mother stepping off a bus, groceries in hand, completely unaware she was being watched. The message was clear. Her time was running out, but so was their control. She began asking questions. During one long evening of translating foreign policy reviews, she casually asked Traore why he continued to risk so much when it would be easier to make a deal with global powers. He didn't hesitate, because they want to buy our silence, and silence is the first step to slavery. That answer haunted her. It echoed every time she powered up her secure device, every time she read the emotionless language of foreign directives. Orders had come in. A high-level meeting was scheduled with a visiting diplomat, and she was to ensure Traore's itinerary was sent ahead of time through her encoded channel. That would be the moment. A drone strike, perhaps, or a poisoning at the hotel. The logistics weren't her concern, just the timing, and then something unexpected happened. Traore invited her to accompany him on a field visit to a remote village in the north. No cameras, no press, just him, 2 guards, and Amira. He said the elders there had written letters about a broken irrigation system, and he wanted to see it himself. Amira almost declined, worried it was a trap, or worse, that she'd be tempted to warn him, but she agreed. The drive took hours through dust-choked roads and dry winds. Along the way, Traore spoke rarely, but when he did, it was always with focus. He asked her what her home was like, what books she read. When she hesitated, he smiled. "You don't have to lie here, Amira. I know what it means to serve people who don't see you." She didn't answer. That night, as they camped near the village, the ambush came. 2 motorcycles, 1 truck, gunfire in the dark. Traore shoved her down behind the wheel well, returning fire as his guards flanked the attackers. She had never seen a leader fight like that, not from behind but in front. He moved like a man with nothing left to lose but everything left to protect. When it was over, Traore had taken a graze to the shoulder. Amira tried to stop the bleeding with her scarf, hands trembling. "You're not a translator," he said then, eyes sharp despite the pain. She looked away, ashamed. "I figured it out when you translated hope as strategy. Only someone who's never had hope would make that mistake." She burst into tears. The confession came out like a dam breaking. Who she was, who had sent her, what they planned, what they threatened. And then the silence. He didn't call for her arrest. He didn't signal the guards. Instead, he said, "They sent you to destroy me, but I think they just gave me the only ally who understands what war truly costs." She didn't know what to say, but she knew she wasn't going back, not to them, not ever. Together they returned to the capital, not just with bullet wounds but with a shared truth. Something had shifted. The mission had ended, but the real story was only beginning. Back in the capital, the compound walls seemed smaller, somehow tighter, as if even the air inside sensed the shift. Amira no longer moved like a ghost within its corridors. She walked beside Traore now, not in deception but in resolve. Their relationship was no longer hidden behind clipped translations or guarded glances. He had spared her, not just from execution but from the weight of her own betrayal. And now she owed him more than silence. She owed him the truth, weaponized in the right direction. The agency didn't retreat quietly. Within days, new threats arrived, messages coded in language only she would understand. "Your choice, your grave," one read. Another was a voice file of her mother breathing in her sleep. They were escalating. They knew she was no longer theirs, and she knew they wouldn't wait long before sending someone else. So she made a decision. "We can't run," she told Traore as they studied maps in the war room. "They'll just send another me, but we can expose them, on our terms." Traore studied her carefully, his fingers resting near the photo of a martyred comrade pinned to the strategy board. "They don't fear bullets," he said. "They fear sunlight." That night, a plan began to take shape. They would stage a diplomatic conference, invite key representatives from allied and neutral nations. Amira would play her part as the multilingual diplomat once more, not to deceive, but to lure the agency's operatives into the open. Traore would feign vulnerability, a publicized route, a predictable schedule, just enough bait to trigger an assassination protocol. But behind the scenes, the compound would be locked down with loyalists, security forces, and live feeds ready to capture every moment. Amira wasn't just bait, she was the bridge. She reached out to another former asset from her training cohort, someone who had vanished years ago and resurfaced only in rumor, codename Vesper. They met in a cafe built from shipping containers on the edge of the capital. Vesper looked older, leaner, his eyes scanning everything but her. "You must really want out to bring me in," he said, sipping coffee that steamed in the morning heat. "They're coming for him," she replied. "And if they succeed, this whole region falls back into chaos. Help me stop it." He leaned back, silent for a long moment, then nodded once. One last job. The day of the conference arrived under an amber sky. Traore stood on the dais with a bandaged arm and his ever-present steadiness. Dignitaries shuffled into their places. Amira moved among them, translating greetings, diffusing tensions, redirecting small talks away from dangerous corners. But her earpiece buzzed quietly. Vesper's voice, 2 targets confirmed, rooftop north, disguised as telecom technicians. Security moved in synchrony. At the moment the agents raised their weapons, the feeds went live. Screens hidden in the press boxes lit up with live footage, snipers caught in infrared, radio chatter intercepted, orders traced back to a foreign military contractor. The world saw everything. Gasps filled the hall, diplomats stood frozen, some filmed, others wept, but Traore simply stepped forward and spoke. "This is not just an attack on me. It is an attack on the sovereignty of every voice that dares to rise unbought. Today, we do not beg for dignity. We demand it." In that moment, Amira felt something unnameable rise inside her. Not redemption, not yet, but direction. For once, she wasn't just cleaning up the blood of others, she was preventing it. That night, Traore stood on the balcony of his residence as fireworks replaced gunfire in the skies above. "You changed the course of their war," he told her. She shook her head. No, I just remembered whose side I was always meant to be on, but both of them knew it wasn't over. The agency wouldn't stop, but now the world was watching, and Amira was done hiding in the shadows. For the first time in years, she slept without locking her door. Months passed, but the ripple created that day in the conference hall continued to grow. Across borders, articles were written, investigations opened, whispers turned into questions. The agency that once operated in absolute darkness found itself exposed in fragments. Not dismantled, no, it would take more than a single sting to bring down a structure built on decades of silence. But it was bleeding. And in that wound, truth had rooted itself. Amira stayed in Burkina Faso, not out of obligation but out of conviction. She had shed her old life like a snakeskin, left behind the lies, the earpieces, the encrypted orders. She no longer translated secrets, she spoke them. On international stages, she addressed councils and NGOs, her voice low but unwavering. "There is no such thing as neutral when your silence funds bullets," she said once to a packed auditorium in Geneva. The clip went viral, not because of her eloquence but because of the rawness in her voice. It was the sound of a woman who had walked both paths and chosen the harder one. Traore watched her evolution not with pride but with respect. He never paraded her. He never used her redemption as a shield. Their alliance remained forged in the quiet, built not for show, but for impact. Together, they created a training initiative in Ouagadougou for young translators and mediators. But its true curriculum was unspoken, to teach discernment, to teach the power of words used in service of people, not power. There were days when the past clawed back. Surveillance still shadowed them sometimes. One afternoon, Amira caught a glimpse of a man from her former life across a marketplace. He did nothing, just looked. But that look was a promise, "We remember," and she met it with a nod that said, "So do I." Then came the invitation. The United Nations requested Traore speak at the General Assembly, a historic gesture, considering how often his name had been tied to rebellion and unrest. This time he accepted, and he asked Amira to stand beside him. As they entered the chamber, a hush fell. Some looked with admiration, others with suspicion. Cameras captured every step, but Traore walked as he always did, not to be seen but to be heard. When he spoke, his words were few, but carved with purpose. "You call us unstable because we refuse your chains. You call us threats because we do not ask permission to protect our people. But today I bring you a witness, a woman sent to end me, who now walks with me. If peace can happen between two enemies in the dust of Burkina Faso, it can happen here." And then Amira spoke. She told them what she had done, what she had almost done. She did not ask for forgiveness, she asked for accountability. And when she finished, there was no applause, just silence, deep, aware, shaken. But it was enough. Back home, things didn't become easier. Reform never sleeps. Traore continued fighting corruption, surviving plots, rebuilding trust. Amira remained by his side. Not as a shield, but as a mirror, one that reminded him who he fought for and what he refused to become. Years later, when she opened a small school on the outskirts of the city, she gave it no grand name, just one word: witness. Inside, children of all languages learned to listen first, speak second, and question always. On the wall hung a single plaque with no names, just a line: "Even the weapon sent to destroy can become the voice that saves." And on certain quiet evenings, Ibrahim Traoré would visit the school, sit in the back during storytelling hour, and leave without saying a word. But the children always knew it was him, because some voices never need to raise themselves to be remembered. In the final years of his presidency, Ibrahim Traoré rarely gave interviews. When pressed, he would simply smile and say, "The work speaks louder than I ever could." But people noticed that whenever he spoke of justice, of healing, or of second chances, His eyes would drift for a moment toward the horizon, as if searching for a time when it all began, or perhaps when it all changed. Amira continued to build. The Witness initiative expanded into digital platforms, reaching displaced youth across continents. She launched a multilingual media program that trained young people to tell stories from their communities with nuance, care, and courage. "The future won't be built by those who scream the loudest," she often said, "but by those who listen longest before they speak." Despite all their progress, shadows lingered. There were still attacks, still corruption, still agents of chaos, but the people had changed. They were no longer so easily manipulated. Because when the truth has a face, a name, a voice that once came from the enemy's camp, it becomes harder to ignore. One winter, on the anniversary of the failed assassination, Amira received a letter written on thick, hand-pressed paper. It contained no sender, just a single line: "The day you hesitated, the world turned." She sat with it for hours, then tucked it between the pages of her journal, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. Traore eventually stepped down from office. He refused the crown of lifetime leadership that many begged him to accept. "Power isn't something you keep," he told a stunned journalist. "It's something you hold, then pass on before it hardens your soul." On the day of the transition, he walked with Amira along the edge of the Witness School grounds. Children ran beside them, shouting in a dozen languages, their voices a tapestry of future and memory. "Do you think we did enough?" she asked. He paused beneath the shade of a neem tree. "I think we gave them a story that wasn't written in blood. That might be enough." That evening, neither of them made public speeches. No banners, no parades. But the lights in every school across the Witness network stayed on late into the night. Teachers told the story of the translator and the soldier who chose truth over war. And in homes across Africa, across the world, families repeated that story to their children, not because it was grand, but because it was real. Because sometimes the story that saves the world doesn't shout, it whispers just loud enough to change a life.